Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am really excited for this review. This is probably the most excited I've been about doing a book review, and that's because I'm going to be talking about Stephen Graham Jones's upcoming novel, My Heart is a Chainsaw. I was able to get an advanced reader's copy through NetGalley, which was awesome. I've been approved for a couple NetGalley ARCs before, but never one that was like this big or on so many people's like anticipated list. And I don't actually have an e-reader, so I had to read the entire thing through an app on my phone. So I don't have like a book to like prop and display today, so I'm just gonna talk about it through my phone. But we'll see if you can see it through this. Here it is, My Heart is a Chainsaw. This is the cover. But let me just really quickly read you guys the synopsis of this book. So, My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. In her quirky, gentrifying rural lake town, Jade sees recent events only her encyclopedic knowledge of horror films could have prepared her for in the latest novel from the Jordan Peele of horror literature, Stephen Graham Jones. Some girls just don't know how to die. Shirley Jackson meets Friday the 13th in My Heart is a Chainsaw. Okay. On the surface is a story of murder in small-town America, but beneath it is its beating heart. A biting critique of American colonialism, indigenous displacement and gentrification, and a heartbreaking portrait of a broken young girl who uses horror movies to cope with the horror of her own life. Jade Daniels is an angry half-Indian outcast with an abusive father, an absent mother, and an entire town that wants nothing to do with her. She lives in her own world, a world in which protection comes from an unusual source. Horror movies, especially the ones where a masked killer seeks revenge on a world that wronged them. And Jade narrates the quirky history of Proof Rock as it is one of those movies. But when blood actually starts to spill into the waters of Indian Lake, she pulls us into her dizzying encyclopedic mind of blood and masked murderers, and predicts exactly how the plot will unfold. Yet even as Jade drags us into her dark fever dream, a surprising and intimate portrait emerges. A portrait of the scared and traumatized little girl beneath the Jason Voorhees mask. Angry, yes, but also a girl who easily cries, fiercely loves, and desperately wants a home. A girl whose feelings are too big for her body. My Heart is a Chainsaw is her story, her homage to horror and revenge and triumph. So that's just the back of the book. So I want to start by talking a little bit about Stephen Graham Jones and me as a reader of Stephen Graham Jones. So I've read two other books by him that I do actually have physical copies of. The novella Night of the Mannequins and his like big novel that everyone always raves about, The Only Good Indians. If you watched some of my videos before, you know that I don't actually like these two books at all. And I want to go over why so I can talk about this book. So my biggest problem with The Only Good Indians was the kind of gonzo style writing, and then the way that Stephen Graham Jones wrote this book is he took four, arguably five main characters, arguably six if we count the villain, and kind of plopped them haphazardly into this story and made almost like a quilt of a story where you would get little snippets of the overall thing told through the perspectives of these main characters. And it just felt very jumbled and very all over the place, and more like it should have been a collection of short stories revolving around one thing versus a full-on novel. The other thing Stephen Graham Jones did in this book was really honed in on basketball and a love of basketball that I am sure he has. Judging by how it is used throughout this book, there's at least 3 scenes that heavily rely on the importance of basketball, which is something I do not like. So that really took me out of it. A lot of these things appear in My Heart is a Chainsaw, but whereas his individual focus of connecting all of these characters is kind of taken away and stripped back, and in My Heart is a Chainsaw, we really only focus on one main character, which is Jade, our protagonist, and how she handles all of the events that are going on, which I think worked way more cohesively for Stephen Graham Jones's writing style, where in this book, the gonzo style really took me out of it because I wasn't sure which characters were being referenced sometimes, what time period, who was speaking. Like, it was very kind of all over the place, but it works when you're only focusing on one character, and actually helped build out this character and her psyche much more effectively than I think it would have if he hadn't used this style of writing. So it fell totally flat here, but it worked very beautifully in My Heart is a Chainsaw. And then his love of basketball is not present in My Heart of a Chainsaw, but his undying love of horror movies is, especially slashers. And this, I feel like if you read, I mean, if you're reading My Heart is a Chainsaw and you're not a fan of slashers and horror, like, I don't know why you're reading it. But the way that it is utilized in this book, it is such a love letter to horror. It is so well crafted. But you need to know Friday the 13th. You need to know Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, Silence of the Lambs, Jaws, Black Christmas. Like, there are so many horror movies you really, really, really need to know to fully get this story. Scream is another big one. He talks about the importance of Scream all over My Heart is a Chainsaw. And he does so in a very similar way as he did with Basketball and the Only Good Indians, except this time he was talking about a subject matter that I think I love as much as he did. So it was something that I really connected with and really got. I'm gonna just pull up a bunch of prop books because I don't have the actual physical book of My Heart is a Chainsaw to talk about. But if you are a fan of Paul Tremblay's A Head Full of Ghosts, which is one of my favorite contemporary horror novels of all time, you'll probably really like My Heart is a Chainsaw. Yeah, the way he uses, what's her name? Like the Last Final Girl blog by Karen Brzett in A Head Full of Ghosts is very similar to the way that Stephen Graham Jones introduces his spin on his love letter to horror. Jade Daniels, from beginning to end, speaks about horror openly. It's something that she's really passionate about. She talks about slashers and all of the slasher tropes throughout the entire book. But the chapters are broken up between actual chapters and then school assignments for Jade's history class, where she is literally documenting the history of horror. And it's very similar to what Paul Tremblay does in A Head Full of Ghosts with his blog post. But this is done, I think, almost in a more effective way, where it is a consistent pattern of story, history lesson, story, history lesson. The history lesson isn't very like, this movie came here and then this happened. It's very much Jade's own interpretation of horror and slashers. And it's very opinionated and it's very well crafted, but there is that absolute love that any horror fan of like the 70s and 80s movies will absolutely gravitate towards when they're reading this. And then the other thing I want to talk about is what didn't work for me in Night of the Mannequins is another element of My Heart is a Chainsaw that really, really worked well for me. So Night of the Mannequins, I did not like this book at all. I thought it was really bizarre. It's pretty much just about a kid who, they steal a mannequin, kid and his friends steal a mannequin, and then the kid gets it in his head that the mannequin's gonna come to life and like wreak havoc all over the town, so he thinks he has to like kill people before the mannequin does it. I don't know, it's very strange. I think it's supposed to be like dark humor. Yeah, I mean, even on the front it says dark, twisted, funny. And this just didn't work for me because you're reading into this psyche of this kid that I didn't find likable, and I didn't quite buy the plot, and it was just this weird introspective look at like the psyche of a teenager, which works really well in My Heart is a Chainsaw. And I think what didn't work so much in Night of the Mannequins is it is, I think, supposed to be humorous, and we are looking into the mind of somebody who's arguably like a sociopath or a psychopath, whereas Jade in this book is none of those things. She is a very she's a very strong, very determined, very independent character. Her own psyche is a little skewed because she does use horror as a way to cope with things in her life. She does kind of have like the deadbeat father and the absentee mother, and she doesn't have a lot of friends. So she does use playing out slasher films in her head as a way to cope and to get through life as a 17-year-old girl, and as an outcast. And I think it's handled very, very well. I think the way he writes her, I think the reader just gets this full blown up insight into this main character, and it works really, really well because we do see everything from her skewed eyes Whereas with this, we are looking in the eyes of someone crazy and going, is that really happening? Is this for real? With Jade, like that question of is she crazy kind of isn't really there in the way that it is in Night at the Mannequins, and I think this benefits that book so much more. So a couple other notes. So there are, I think, two major elements that make My Heart is a Chainsaw work so well. And this is really hard for me to do because I really want to talk about like certain scenes and aspects and characters, but I also don't want to put any spoilers in here whatsoever, so I'm not going to do that. So this is probably going to be more of a vague review. But there's two major elements that I think really work for this book. The first being, as I said earlier, the straight up love letter to horror. This is such an amazing way to put a spin on a slasher story, tell everybody reading it about why slashers are important, really dissect the slasher, really look at it for what it is, and kind of just like fan out on it all. It's really fun if you love the genre, if you especially love like those 80s classic slasher films. This is brilliant. And I think once you get that part of the book, you get like the fun aspect of it. So Stephen Graham Jones can then introduce the more serious aspect of it. And I think by interweaving the fun, campy aspect of slashers with more of the serious undertones in slashers is a really good way for Stephen Graham Jones, as well as his lead Jade, to kind of give that nod of the, to just kind of show the respect that these genres deserve that the modern media tends to kind of overlook and ignore so often, which leads me into the second portion of this book that I really like, or which leads me into like the other aspect of this book that makes this book work so well for me, because at the end of the day, this book is one of the most feminist books I have ever read, ever. And it's not just that it is the protagonist being a very strong female lead, but it really hones in the idea of the final girl and the trope of the final girl being something that does empower women. It's the idea that you have to overcome hardship and that you're strong enough to do so, to not only make it through the slasher, but to also overcome your fears and overcome your monsters. And I think the way Stephen Graham Jones does it in this book is so intelligent and so relatable and so respectful. And the way he writes this main character, I just found her to just be like, yes, go women, go. Like everything about it is just painting a picture of strong female leads. And Jade is not our only character in this book, obviously. There are other characters that she has to interact with, but he does a really good job of building up strong female characters. The main characters in this book are all very strong individual women, and they all come from like different backgrounds and such. And I just thought he does an insane job depicting teenage girls, which I think men typically have a hard time doing that in writing. Grady Hendrix does an amazing job with it in My Best Friend's Exorcism, and Stephen Graham Jones does another amazing job with it in My Heart is a Chainsaw, but very different versions of a teenage girl. Whereas Grady Hendrix are like girls from the 80s, this is a very modern teenager. And throughout all of this, Graham Jones also does a really beautiful and tasteful job of depicting a lot of hardships that women have to go through in life. He talks about things that not every woman has gone through, but definitely something that many women have, and he does it in a very tactful way, very respectful way, and I really loved how he told his main character's stories and how they all got revealed over time. He does a very good job with that. He really blew my expectations away. I was not a fan of Stephen Graham Jones' writing prior to this, and then all of a sudden he wrote a book that I thought was an absolute 5-star read. If I have to give a criticism on this book, I will say the ending to me felt a little flat. There's one scene in particular at the very end that felt a little cheesy to me, but everything else was so well done and so well crafted that I'm okay overlooking that. And at the end of the day, this is a slasher film. So if it didn't have sort of a cheesy ending, I also feel like it might be cheating the genre. But I do have my hesitations on the very end, and that's fine. I really did think it was going to go somewhere else. I kind of wish it was a little bit longer too, just the conclusion, just so I got a little bit more out of what happened to all the various characters. But I didn't get that, and that's okay. I really would have liked that, but I do think the ending fits the story solely because of how it fits into the genre. I hope all of my like blabbering made sense, because it's really hard to talk about a book without giving anything away, especially when I liked it this much and I really just want to pick like bits and scenes and characters and like really dive into them. And maybe I'll do that after the book gets released, do like a review part 2 and really come back in and have like a full discussion of My Heart is a Chainsaw and what I think of it with spoilers, just so I can actually talk about all the incredible things in this book. But yes, I do highly, highly, highly recommend checking this book out when it comes out. I believe it's getting released on August 31st. So definitely like a while away. But it was such a journey. It was so much fun. It is such a pro-women book, and it is such a pro-slasher book, and it does such a good job of showing why the horror genre deserves so much more respect. And especially horror films. I think it does a really, really good job of saying why scary films deserve more respect, because I do actually think that books in the horror genre get quite a good deal of respect. We can look at Stephen King's bibliography, or, you know, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, like that's definitely there, Edgar Allan Poe, like on the classic section. But I do think that slashers and horror films have a lot of messages that are told through them that get overlooked because of the genre stigmas that they have, and this book does a really good job to point out why it should not be like that, and why it is a very respectable genre, and then it is a very respectable book with an amazing message in it. So yes, I am so thrilled with this book. I can't believe I liked this book. Like, I really went into this book and I was like, crap, like I have to read 400 pages on my phone's app, and I don't know how I'm gonna get through it, because it was a struggle to get through his other 2 books. But no, I didn't want to put this book down. I read it in like 3 days. It was amazing. As much as I hated reading on a teeny tiny phone, it was so worth it. So yes, I will literally be buying a physical copy of this book though, because that is how much I loved it. I want to own a copy, and I want to be able to talk about it and reread it. This book is phenomenal. Cannot say enough good things about it. Please go check it out. Anyways, as always, thank you guys so much for watching today. I've got a bunch of reviews I'm working on that are going to be coming up soon. I think my next review is going to be Stephen King's Later. I did just finish that book up. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. And if there are any other new books that are out that I should be checking out, leave them in the comments below. I would love to know what books you guys think I should read and review, and what might work for me. As always, I post on Mondays and Thursdays, and if you like my videos, please hit those like and subscribe buttons down below. It helps me out so much, and it's awesome chatting with you guys. So again, thanks for watching. I hope you all have an awesome day, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Mwah.